Knight here with another special report. Bioshock 2 wasn't as well received as its predecessor, with lower sales and a Metacritic aggregate score of 88 versus the original's 94. The original also took home numerous Game of the Year honors, while its follow-up has sort of become the black sheep of the franchise, unheralded and underappreciated. But I'd argue it's largely misunderstood. Whereas Bioshock used Ayn Rand's objectivism as its philosophical foundation and Atlas Shrugged as a setting, the sequel explores collectivist ideologies like socialism and Marxism. Like its predecessor, the sequel doesn't really endorse or condemn its philosophy du jour. Rather, its ideology, largely represented by Sophia Lamb, underpins the setting and character motivations. Dr. Sophia Lamb was a clinical psychiatrist brought to rapture by Andrew Ryan himself to help the citizens deal with the stress of isolation. But almost immediately, Sophia's altruism and charitable inclinations clashed with Ryan's libertarian ideals, and Dr. Lamb began planning for an eventual revolution. Sophia had been taught from an early age by her father to cultivate the greater good, and while living and working in Hiroshima, she was traumatized by the atomic bombings, especially the Allies' perversion of her notion of the greater good. Like Ryan, Sophia became convinced of the inevitability of nuclear war, and she graciously accepted his offer to come to Rapture. Lamb's focus on the greater good has invited comparisons to John Stuart Mill, an English philosopher who believed we should base our actions on the best possible outcome for society as a whole. In that way, Mill also subscribed to a greater good, and none other than Bioshock 2's creative director, Jordan Thomas, has made the connection between Mill and Lamb. But a closer look at Mill's work uncovers a number of problematic passages. Mill's seminal 1859 work On Liberty describes the relationship between the citizenry and the state, and it's clear he'd prefer they intersect as little as possible. In his opinion, and I quote, "The sole end for which mankind are warranted individually or collectively in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection. That the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. In other words, a government's only legitimate function is protecting our personal liberty in the most literal sense." He also talks about elected leaders being fully accountable to the populace and serving at their pleasure, not the other way around. And he especially warns against the tyranny of the majority. Protection, therefore, against the tyranny of the magistrate is not enough. There needs protection also against the tyranny of the prevailing opinion and feeling. I don't know about you, but limiting federal power, absolute personal freedom, Mill sounds libertarian. More like Andrew Ryan than a collectivist like Sophia Lamb. No, I think Lamb is altogether different real-life analogs. These laborers who must sell themselves piecemeal are a commodity like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition, to all the fluctuations of the market. When someone steals another clothes, we call them a thief. Should we not give the same name to one who could clothe the naked and does not? Machines and other improvements must serve to ease the work of all, and not to enable a few to grow rich at the expense of millions and tens of millions of people. The first is Karl Marx, the second Basil the Great, and the third Lenin. And there's countless other collectivists cut from the same cloth as Sophia Lamb. Though, interestingly enough, both the collectivist and Lamb had somewhat contradictory views on the role of young people. Marx calls out capitalism's exploitation of children, but he and others like him saw the value in indoctrinating kids at a young age. And Sophia Lamb also has a very utilitarian view of children, seeing them as the perfect vessels for altruistic ideals. In her mind, the perfect child has no free will and exists only to serve the common good. And she attempted to mold her daughter Eleanor into the ideal utopian being, with a genius-level intellect and no individualism or selfishness. Eleanor was mostly isolated from other children, whom she referred to as dog-eaters, since Sophia taught her that they were, quote, raised on a diet of dog-eat-dog, or laissez-faire capitalism. Sophia did everything she could to indoctrinate Eleanor, but not at the expense of losing her, which eventually happened. To make a long story short, two of Rapture's most ethically challenged researchers, Yi-Su Chang and Bridget Tenenbaum, began abducting little girls to be servile creatures called little sisters, who'd extract the precious substance called Adam from corpses and even the living. Adam could be processed into a serum called a plasmid, which gives people supernatural powers, and many of these folks became crazed addicts known as splicers. Ordinarily, Adam was harvested from a special sea slug, but as their population decreased and the demand for plasmids shot up, Suchong and Tenenbaum realized they could obtain Adam from splicers. So they began experimenting on children, determined to create tiny abominations that, along with their protectors known as Big Daddies, could harvest Adam from people. The researchers discovered that only prepubescent girls responded to their treatment, and so their benefactor, the loathsome Frank Fontaine, opened the Little Sisters Orphanage as a way to acquire a ready supply of test subjects. Somehow, Eleanor was acquired by Suchong, who didn't know her true identity, and Sophia's daughter was converted into a little sister and bonded to Subject Delta, the protagonist of Bioshock 2. Through a long series of events, Sophia eventually reacquires Eleanor and is able to mostly deprogram her daughter. By then, the Rapture Civil War between Ryan and Fontaine's splicers was well underway, and Sophia mostly sat that out and remained in the background during the events of the first game. Interestingly, despite her altruism, Sophia had a cold and aloof attitude towards people in general. From her daughter to those she sought to help in the growing quasi-religious movement known as the Rapture Family, which formally assumed power after the death of Ryan and Fontaine in the first game. Sophia's detached attitude didn't go unnoticed by Eleanor, who said that by her standards, it would be better to have the entire world equally miserable than to allow us to strive on our own behalf. So everyone is equally poverty-stricken. One of the main criticisms of the tenets of Marxism and communism. Prior to the events of the first game, and with Sophia's influence growing amongst Rapture's citizens, Andrew Ryan proposed a series of public debates, thinking the populace would turn against Lamb. But as you discover in audio logs in Bioshock 2, the debates aren't quite the shellacking Ryan hoped for, and Rapture's founder begins considering more drastic measures to curb Lamb's influence. That included imprisoning Lamb on trumped-up charges in the Persephone penal colony. But after Lamb led an uprising in the prison, she escaped confinement and waited out Rapture's civil war, at which point she re-emerged, becoming the Underwater City's new spiritual leader. And so the main villains of Bioshock 2 are Sophia Lamb and her army of followers, aka the Rapture Family, the collectivist antidote to Ryan's individualism. In the end, and like the first game, Bioshock 2 doesn't really condone or denounce the philosophy of the antagonist, but it does provide a fascinating inverse to Bioshock 1. Thanks for joining me for another special report. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to my televisual program, and I'll see you next time. This is Jimmy Midnight signing off.